Hi folks, today's question is how do you calculate grade? How do you calculate the rise and the slope in your layout in a way that you have some control over it and you can be consistent? So I want to show you a couple of things in this video. One is how I calculated the percent grade, how I transferred that to my track plan, and then how I transferred that to my layout. So let me start with a very quick answer. How do you calculate grade? Actually, it's somewhat simple. It's simply rise over run, or the distance you need to rise divided by the distance you have in track length to run. In my situation, I needed to rise 4 inches, and I wasn't quite sure the distance. So let me show you how I calculated that. I started this work on my track plan. I'm using Real Modeler Pro. However, there are many different pieces of software you can use to lay out your track plan. I've actually blown up a larger scale version of the track plan with the 1 foot square or 12-inch square grids, which is really helpful for doing this work. And as I blew it up, it gives me a chance to actually count the individual inches in the layout. The other thing I've done is I've color-coded sections of this track plan. That's more for me to understand the power zones and to differentiate when tracks running underneath each other. It's not really related to the elevation in this situation. So what did I know? I knew I needed to be at 4 inches by the time I got to this spot right here, right? Because if I walk across here, I see that this yellow level is going to cross under the track above. It's going to pass under the white and the red track. So I just marked here with pencil 4 inches. So then I had to determine how far back I could go, or how much run I had. So in order to do that, I used a simple compass. Now you can do this in software, but frankly I found it easier to do it with my compass. So I took my compass here and I have set the point so that they're 6 inches apart. So what that means is for every 2 steps I take with the compass, I'll have gone 12 inches or a foot. And then I very simply started walking from my 4-inch mark here down, counting. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 is right there, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now I'm going to stop walking here. I would continue walking to figure the full length, and I'll remember that 16 number, and just to make this move a little more quickly. And then I just continue to walk the compass up here along this straight section of track. And then I determined at this 0-inch point, basically where I would be at the level coming out from underneath here. If I counted from the point I stopped here, it's another 15 steps to here. So in total, I had 16 from 4 inches all the way down, 16 steps all the way down here to this point. And then I had another 15 compass steps up to here. So if I add, take 15 and 16, I add them together. That comes to 31, and then you multiply 31 by 6 inches, because that's what the compass was set to. That's 186 inches. So if we move over here and take a look at the math, my run is 186 inches. So if I divide my rise of 4 inches by 186 inches, I come out with a 2.15% slope, slightly over 2% slope. Now, that's pretty manageable for most locomotives, and in fact I tested that before I screwed everything down in place. I laid the plywood in place, I cut it out, I set it up, and I tested it. So I know that that slope will work for my layout. So then the question becomes, how do we know where our plywood, our layout, should be set? So I'm going to step back over here to the blueprint, and there's something else that I did here in the drawing. So you can see I've actually marked on this layout the elevations at different points. And what I've realized, I could go from, if I go 12 inches, I would drop from 4 inches to 3 3/4. And then another 12 inches and I dropped down to 3 3/8. And what I did is I actually I took my 4% mark, my 4-inch mark, and then down here where I stopped at number 16, roughly halfway through the run, I set that at 2 inches. And so this starts to give me some points that I can work with. So now I have 3 points on the layout, right? I have 0 inches up here, I have 2 inches down here, and then I have 4 inches up here. So then in order to keep the runs even, it was a matter of me measuring out that distance, figuring out how far do I need to go to drop a 1/2 inch, how far do I need to go to drop a 1/4 inch. And basically using my rule and tape measure, I was able to set those up. And so I made my measurements, and you can see I just sort of marked on the blueprint 3 3/4, 3 3/8, 3 inches here, 2 3/4, 2.5 inches. Let's see, we're probably 2 1/4 inches right around here, then 2 inches. Then we drop to 1.75 inches, 1.5 inches, 1 1/4 inch, 1 inch, 0.75, 0.5, 0.25, and then 0 inches. So now on my layout here, I have everything marked out, and I know from using my compass approximately where that should be on the track. So how do I transfer that to my layout? Well, let me show you. Okay, so we're looking at the layout of this section that we're just looking at on the blueprint. And let me see, I'll orient this so you have an idea of the angle. We're actually looking at the layout from this perspective. So this is the section of track. We were just looking at the larger color blueprint. This is the 0 point over here. This is the 4-inch point over here. And this is the 2-inch point over here. And there's a grid here, so I can actually count in on my plywood. I can count in how many feet and how many inches I need in order to mark my elevations. So that's basically what I did. And to tell you the truth, I tend to start at the high point. So I know this is set at, actually right here, is set at 4 inches. So this riser is at 4 inches. And then I started to measure down a foot, and I knew at a foot I was going to be at 3 3/4 inches. So I set this riser at 3 3/4 inches above the layout. And then I knew at another foot I was going to be at 3.5. And so I made those settings and I set those risers in place as we were moving along. Now, before I got all the risers in place, the other thing I did is I had laid my track in place. You can see I have it just taped in place. And if we look closely here, you'll see some radius lines, right? So before I laid my track in place, I had to draw a radius. So in fact, this here is a 28-inch radius that circles around. And this is a 30-inch radius track that circles around. So now I start to have some sense of where the track's going to lay, and I can start to think a little bit about where my elevations will be. And before I even cut the plywood, I start to mark the plywood up. So if we walk back over here, I figured out where my 2-inch mark would be, and I marked it right on the plywood, and it's roughly in the center of this section. I walked down the track to the level end. I looked at the blueprint. The blueprint showed me that the 0-inch level would be approximately 2 inches beyond the edge of the table. So I marked that point. And I already had my 4-inch mark. So now I have some markers that I can work with. And I start to count off the distance that I needed. So we have our 1/4-inch mark, our 1/2 inch mark, 0.75 inch mark, 1 inch mark, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.75, 2 inches, and it continues like that right up the edge. And I get all these set up on the plywood before I actually put the supports in. I'll place the plywood in place. I've cut it. I'll place it in place so I have a sense. Sometimes I have to put a screw in it to hold it keep it from jiggling around. And then I'll sneak under the layout and I'll show you I use kind of a mix of rises. So you can see right there, it's a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, similar to what I used to make my braces with is the upright, and then I used a piece of hardwood trim. These are actually old window sashes that are made out of a very hard wood. They're about 3/4 of an inch wide and 1.25 inches long, and they're perfect for braces. And I think you want something hard to screw that plywood top into. If you screw into the end of a piece of plywood, you won't get a good bite, but if you screw into that hardwood, you will. So that one there is adjustable. You can see it's, you may be able to notice, I tried to make these with a little slot in them so that I can slide them up and down. So they have a single screw here and then 2 to hold it steady. So that's set me at 2 inches. We have another one that raises it a little bit more, and you can see that those walk right under the table and walk me right up to my 4-inch level. Something I try that seems to work out pretty well too. I don't use rises all the way around. When I start to get to these lower, this is only bringing it up 1 inch. So I just took a piece of wood stock here and cut it and have just sort of screwed it in to the wood. If I walk down here, I'm at 0.75, and then I have a little shim holding that up in place there. So that's basically how I've set my layout in place, how I calculate elevations, and how I transfer elevations from my track plan onto my layout. I hope you guys find this helpful. Good luck with your modeling.